Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why we tend to blame the unusual event more when something goes wrong? Like, if a factory accidentally pollutes a river, we might point fingers at the factory that rarely operates, even if both were needed for the pollution. This idea that how normal or abnormal something is affects our blame game is called a normality effect. But what happens when we're not talking about simple events, but things that can happen to different degrees, like how much waste a factory produces? Can normality still sway our judgments? That is the big question that a team of researchers wanted to answer. They looked at how we assign blame or responsibility when causes aren't just on or off, but can vary like a dial that can be turned up or down. Think about our river pollution example again. Instead of just the factory operating or not, imagine they produce a certain amount of waste. What if one factory usually produces a little and the other produces a lot? And what if today both produce just enough waste to pollute the river? Would we still blame the one that was acting unusually, even if its unusual contribution was still within a range? The researchers suspected that maybe, just maybe, these normality effects might disappear when we deal with these more continuous or graded causes. So they designed two clever experiments to test this. Imagine you are a participant in their study. First, you'd go through a learning phase. You'd be shown different scenarios, like a sewage plant and a lumber plant, and learn how much waste they typically produce. This learning phase was super important because it helped you get a feel for what is normal for each plant. They used a bunch of different scenarios to make sure their findings weren't just a fluke in one specific situation. After you learned the ropes of these scenarios, you'd move on to the judgment phase. This is where the real magic happened. They presented you with a specific situation where an outcome occurred, like the river getting polluted. The key here was how they messed with the normality of one of the causes, which they called the focal cause. In experiment 1, they played with the variance, which is basically how spread out the typical values of something are. Imagine a plant that usually produces waste, and its production numbers jump around a lot. That's high variance. Now imagine another plant where the numbers are always pretty close to the average. That's low variance. They made the focal cause have a low variance, meaning its actual production was statistically unusual compared to what you'd expect from a low variance source. In experiment 2, they went a different route and manipulated the mean, which is just the average. So one plant might normally produce a lot of waste, a high mean, but in the abnormal condition, its actual production was very low, which was unusual for it. The idea was to make one of the causes behave in a statistically abnormal way. Crucially, after you'd learned the patterns and then saw the specific scenario with the abnormal cause, they asked you to judge how much that focal cause was responsible for the outcome. They also asked how confident you were in your judgment. And here's the mind-blowing part. Despite successfully making people feel that one cause was statistically unusual and surprising, their actual blame or causal judgments didn't budge. It didn't matter if the cause was jointly necessary for the outcome or individually sufficient. The abnormality of the cause didn't seem to influence how responsible people thought it was, and it wasn't like they were unsure either. Their confidence levels remained high. This was a pretty big deal because previous research had shown these strong normality effects with simple on or off events. But when you introduce these more graded, continuous causes, it seems like our brains might switch gears. Instead of focusing on how normal or abnormal something is, we might be paying more attention to the actual contribution of that cause to the outcome. So, what does this all mean? Well, it challenges some of the existing theories about how we make causal judgments. The idea that we always mentally run through what if scenarios prioritizing the more normal ones might not hold up as strongly when dealing with continuous causes? It is possible that with continuous variables, the idea of necessity and sufficiency becomes less clear-cut. There are so many slightly different possibilities when something can vary in degree that maybe the impact of one statistically odd value gets diluted. It also adds an interesting layer to the debate about whether causation itself is graded. Some people think we can say this was more of a cause than that, while others argue it is just our confidence about causation that is graded. This study suggests that maybe in these continuous scenarios we really are focusing on the actual contribution of a cause, rather than its typicality leading to these graded judgments and doing so with high confidence. This means our causal reasoning might be more about the raw input and output, rather than dwelling on whether the input was a bit weird. Now, it is important to acknowledge a limitation. The way they had participants learn the statistical properties was through repeated trials and implicit learning. This might have encouraged a more analytical, statistical way of thinking, rather than the more intuitive, gut-feeling type of judgment that normality effects often engage. Future research could explore these continuous causes in more natural settings where information is given more directly, not just learned implicitly. Ultimately, this research is super exciting because it shows that effects we thought were pretty universal in how we assign blame might be more specific than we imagined. Normality effects are strong with simple yes or no events, but when things get more nuanced, like with continuous causes, our judgments seem to rely on different factors. Primarily the actual contribution of a cause. It highlights the need to test our theories of how our minds work across a wide range of situations. Because what holds true for one type of problem might not be the whole story. It's a great reminder that our brains are complex and adaptable, constantly finding new ways to make sense of the world. So, next time you are trying to figure out why something went wrong, remember that while the unusual might catch your eye, the actual contribution of each factor might be what truly drives your judgment, especially when things aren't so black and white. Thanks for joining me on RUBIN'S Mind Lab. If you found this breakdown helpful, give it a like, leave a comment with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating world of psychology. See you next time.